Yo, what up, what up, what up, and welcome back to Pnoid News, man. Listen, so I saw this interview of Sargon of Akkad discussion with Aaron McIntyre, and I'll be honest with you, it had me come up with a new ideology about something, and I think maybe we need to discuss it, right? And so Carl, I know you're probably gonna check this out because I'm gonna tag you in it. Here's the idea. Um, Maybe it's not religion that we're missing. I think it's a tie to the land. Listen in for more. All right, this is actually worth listening to. Let's rock.
That we saw online throughout the years, now kind of arriving at a conclusion that scares some, worries others. Many are not sure how to address this. So we'll just go ahead and dive right into it. Your post talked about kind of the problems that classical liberalism faces, that it made some assumptions that a lot of people have forgotten about, and now those things leave it vulnerable to some real problems. What are some of those issues that you're talking about with classical liberalism?
Well, the I think the one that is at the very bottom that it is difficult for an atheist such as myself to admit is that it was always presupposed by the classical liberals, say Locke and the cohort around that sort of time, late 17th century, early 18th century, is that they would be Christians. That was always presupposed. And therefore, you get a Christian social morality as a substratum to the very notion of classical liberalism. And this made classical liberalism work in its own day and for many, many years afterwards, obviously, because it really is a.
All right, so let's have this conversation, right? Because I think this is kind of important. I don't think it was the Christian morality that made it work. And let me break this down to you, right? And this is way outside of the spectrum of things. But the problem is that even back then you had specialization, right? And the specialization back then came from the people who were studying this were not like subsistence farmers, right? And so they didn't really have the aspect, and they didn't understand the aspect of the difference between urban and rural populations, right? And the idea that even in an urban area, like you were still tied to that urban area, you were tied to a job that was, whether you were in London or Paris or New York or Philly, whatever it was, right back in the day. This idea of you being a complete individual would never work, right? Because you were always tied to the land or the sea, as it were, right? Because all these cities were like coastal cities, so like the regular common folk, right, would end up being tied to a job where you'd have to go make ropes for boats, or you'd have to be a fish guy, like you, I don't know, whatever you did, a cook, right? Or even if you were like on the outskirts of the city, you still had to stand here and grow your own food, right? You had to make sure that your family ate these type of things, right? And especially in early modern America, the idea that you would be a single human being, right? Like you would, like in Puritan, like America, northern of Pennsylvania, right? Like above Pennsylvania, like New York, New Hampshire, Connecticut, Vermont, Maine, Massachusetts. Maine not then, because like Maine didn't come to be until later on. But like the idea that you would end up being a single person was unheard of, right? Like if you were a single male in the community, you had to live with the family and maintain those family values. And that's with heavy Christian ideologies, right? And it isn't the Christian ideologies that were really important, right? It was the fact that you had to be tied to the land. You had to be tied to that community, right? And these are the baseline things of all religions, like across the world. I don't care, you go like the Buddhists, you go to Hindus, you go to Muslims, right? You go anywhere, you go to the Jews. These are people who have heavy community ties. And I think that's actually so if you look at it on levels, right? You know what I'm saying? Where you have different levels of people or different levels of human ideology, right? And it's all built like your brain's built on, like the reptilian brain, then the monkey brain, then the animal brain, then the monkey brain, then the human brain, right? So like with regular with regular human society and the way we live, it's culture, right? It's geography, culture, religion, state, right? Like these all match up on top of each other, right? And like the very baseline is geography, right? And then you go to culture, right? Because your geography forms your culture. So like if you're mountain people, you're much more like, persnickety. You're much more subsistence as you were, right? So you'll have like the culture, like the mountainous peoples are the original cultures of any area, right? Whether it be the Basques, whether it be the people in the Caucasus in Europe, whether it be the Kurds in, in the Middle East, right? Whether it be the Tibetans in, down in Nepal, right? The mountain peoples are always the base of your culture. They keep you honest, right? As a people, right? And they're usually unconquerable, right? Until recently, even today, like even in places like Afghanistan, like it's not a winnable place. Like, man, listen, like you can't beat mountain people. You just can't. There's not enough bombs, right, to beat them, right? And so, with this being said, you have this idea where these people, right? So I almost like lost where I was going with this, right? You have this baseline of people, right, where your geography will form into your culture, right? So like if you're a coastal people, like you're going to be much more tied to the fish, to the sea. You're going to have different types of mentalities, right? If you're on the plains, you're going to be much more herding, more like spread out, as it were, right? People in China and Asia, right? It's the rice versus wheat when you study things like anthropology, right? It's you have rice people, right, where it takes an entire community of human beings to be able to cultivate rice, right? Because you got to pick each individual one out of the pod, like you massive amounts of irrigation and then non-irrigation and irrigation again, like you have to wet it and dry it and wet it, right? Like the process of growing these things and having that be your main carbohydrate forms you into being much more social, much more socialistic, which forms into more communistic ideologies. You're more tied together as a people, right? So the baseline's your geography, right? And your geography forms into a culture. And then your religion fits on top of that. Your religion wraps around that. That's why, like, you'll have old, like harvest time religious events, right? We have in America, we have Thanksgiving, you have Boxing Day, all these type of things, right? All over the world, you'll have like these. Every culture has a religion based on, the moon and the stars and New Year's and all these type of things, right? Because that's baseline. That's before religion. That goes below your religion, right? It's much deeper. And honestly, it's the tie to the land that fucked everything up. It's not liberalism as per se. It's not even the loss of your religion, right? It's the loss of your ties to the land. That's when everything went super sideways. It's when grocery stores and giant supermarkets became a thing. It's when you're no longer forced to grow your own food because you're not tied to your land. Therefore, you're not tied to your community. This is a big thing. This is where like government welfare states, like, and this is like, oh, welfare is bad. Why? Right? It's not about inflation. It's about destruction of the family. It has nothing to do with your religion. Right? Welfare don't screw up your religion. Welfare is a positive thing for your religion because you're taking care of the poor. So why does it mess up your society then? The reason is because it unties you from the community. It unties you from your family. It unties you from the people around you. This is why welfare is a bad thing. There are bigger problems when you're looking at stuff, right, that are much more baseline when you're having these conversations. But let's keep rocking, man, because this is super interesting as far as I'm concerned.
Form of kind of game theory against the state. It's a legalistic doctrine that only has a very narrow focus on what areas of life that it should actually have any control over, any influence over. And it made sense. It makes sense to have a doctrine of rights, natural rights, when dealing with the government, because it's not just that you as an individual benefit from that. Everyone will benefit from a general softening of the hard edge of state power, because if the people in charge also believe in a doctrine of natural rights that is underpinned by God, then you have a much more stable society that is less prone to political purges, to the confiscation of property. It's much more amenable to liberal ideals. And honestly, I think there have been many people who have said this over the years, but
All right, so let's actually discuss this point, right? Because this is some very interesting ideas, right? So when did liberalism pop up, right? Because liberalism popped up with a certain technology, right? Liberalism popped up with the technology of firearms, right? As a very beginning thing, right? It's not just cannons and stuff, but it's also like rifles, right? Because here's the basic premise: when Charlemagne, right, who was a real ass crazy leader, right? He was like an actual dictator type. When he went to go conquer people like the Basque, he lost. What does that mean? That means that back then, when you didn't have rifles, you just needed swords and hands, right? You needed to be able to know the terrain, right? And this was enough to soften the state's power to where, like, you didn't have to have things like liberalism, right? And we think, like, we have this problem. They'll bring us up later in the video if we get to that point, because I'm breaking this way too much down. Like, we're 11 minutes, like, into this video, and, like, we're 4 minutes into the video we're watching, right? Because this might end up being, like, a 5-hour video on some nonsense, but I'm fine with that, right? So here's the premise, right? If you can fight back against the government because they don't have guns, right? And you have, like, it's just sword on sword, then it's just man on man, right? And this is also why you see the destruction of the male the male and the father in society. By the way, happy Father's Day to all my brothers out there, right? Anybody who's a father. Most of y'all internet cats ain't got no kids, right? But, like, as a male and a father, you used to have ultimate, like, dictate over your household, your land, all these type of things that were much more trust in you. And the reason is because, like, all you needed was swords and hands, right? So you could defend yourself with swords. You could defend yourself with arrows. Once you brought guns into the conversation, you get enough men with guns, there's nothing you can do. You're going to get rolled over, right? And so this legal like softening of the state's power was only necessary at that point, right? Which brings us back to, what is actually the reason why it is that liberalism fucked shit up, right? It's a much deeper thing, right? In the end of the day, because, like, these dictates, right, where, like, we go, everybody has a gun, so therefore we all have the ability to fight against the government. But now the government has nuclear weapons. That's how you end up with postmodernism, right? Once the government becomes so powerful that the people know that, like, if the government really wanted to, they could just roll them over, everything gets sideways and nothing works anymore the way it's supposed to. But let's keep going in this video.
The idea that classical liberalism is kind of an extraction of the Christian English tradition, political tradition, and just a codification of it, and that's why it works. I am genuinely at the point where I think that that's probably true. And without the underpinning of what we can just broadly term conservatism, the liberal tradition becomes what has been known in academic circles as comprehensive liberalism. And that's liberalism applied to every aspect of life, where the only moral factor is whether a person consents to the social contract or not. And you can imagine what applying a doctrine of consent does to all of those things in our lives that we didn't actually consent to, but still consider to be a public good, such as being born, such as having a family, such as having a country. All of these things are things that we inherited or gifted without anyone asking us whether these were right or wrong and whether we wanted them. And we are habituated and raised into them, and they are good things. But they're not liberal things. And
See, I mean, this is the problem, right? This is the problem right here of, like, when you say these are good things, right? you can make an argument against, and I have seen people make arguments against all of these being bad things, like these anti-natalists, the individuals who say, like, I didn't ask to be born. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've heard kids or even my kids go like, I didn't ask to be born, right? These type of things, right? And the idea that like you're born to some country, like this country, right? This idea, right, as an in general thing, it doesn't work when you have the underpinnings of everybody as an individual, right? When you go like we're part of something larger than us, that's a different animal altogether, right? So this, how do I put this? This mentality of, you know what I mean, saying that like these are ultimate good things and they're not liberal things. Like they're both liberal. Like it is liberal, it is anti-liberal depending on your stance, right? Because opportunities afforded to you by these things, you know what I mean, like allow you to be a better and, you know what I mean, a more effective individual, right? Because that's what liberalism is in the end of the day. It's just being an individual, right? But like saying that they're ultimate goods is nonsense, right? You know what I mean? Because like these assumptions, right, are not something that you have. And this is where we go back to like you have to have a culture for them to be good, right? Like Carl Benjamin or Sargon of Akkad, you know what I mean, as we used to call him, is British, right? So, and in being British or English or whatever the fuck you want to call them people, I don't really care, United Kingdomers, whatever, right? Those people live on an island, right? And those island people, you know, like they're proud of that island. And, you know, like we as Americans, we only now become proud when somebody's like standing up against our shit, right? You know, like we have a meme where it's, you know, basically like me whenever, you know what I mean, like some European hops on, you know what I mean, hops into VC, right? Like, you know, like me normally it's like the United States, right? And then, you know, we're like the government's trash, right? We're all Ted Kaczynski and shit on the fucking internet. But then, like, some European hops in, you know, we turn into fucking Thomas Jefferson and the Revolutionary Soldier. Like, where are them redcoats at? You know, that's where you end up being. So this idea, you know, what I mean, it's not anti-liberal, but it's not ultimately good. So let's get back to the video.
And so if you apply a comprehensive view of liberalism to all things in life, you get a universal acid that eats away at every social institution imaginable. And I think that's happened, and I think that's where we are now.
Yeah, obviously, I'm in agreement with that. And there's a lot of different parts of that we probably want to unpack. But let's just go ahead and start at the beginning. Like you said, a lot of this seems really rational to a bunch of people who are kind of obsessed with contract law, because there's this substrate of Christianity, particularly in the, you know, America and other places, kind of a Protestant Christian substrate that everything kind of arises out of. And there's these assumptions we can make. We can liberalize some of these interactions in the public square because we know at the end of the day people will still be bound by these other social spheres in really important ways. And in fact, the American founders were really clear about this. You have people like John Adams saying the Constitution is only good for, you know, governing a moral and religious people. It's not good for anybody else. So they weren't unaware of this issue. This is not something that we've just reverse engineered and discovered. This is something that many of the people enacting what was happening there understood kind of as a foundational necessity for liberalism going forward. What do you think it is, though, that allowed this to kind of break free of that base understanding, this understanding that this has to be part of this? Why do people feel that they were able to expand the sphere of liberalism in a way that would eventually kind of erode that basis of Christian consensus?
So I'll be honest, we can have this, like, this conversation is different, right? This conversation is economic. And Carl's gonna miss that completely. So like let me address what actually happened there, right? And I really do hope these guys watch this video, like, yo, because real shit, like they both need corrected to death on this, because like they both just habitually wrong. All right, check this out. So really simply put, the reward, right? The reward in the 1950s and 60s, right, of us standing here having the opportunity to build a middle class that was unlike anything the world had ever seen before, right? Was attributed to us being liberal fucking Christians, right? It was attributed to like us just being Americans, right? And everybody saw them and oh my God, like look at all the stuff they have and look how good their society is. And if you look at like old maps from like electoral, what's it called? Like from the electoral like colleges or whatever it is, right? From like from the electoral college back then, right? From the presidential elections, it's just like there's like one state and then all red, right? Or like one state and all blue, right? And because like we were a unified country, right? Like because of the fact that the rewards were amazing. Now, this had nothing to do with us being Americans or liberal. It had everything to do with the fact that the rest of the world got exploded, right? During World War I and World War II, the entirety of the European fucking infrastructure and manufacturing infrastructure just got destroyed, right? And then you had Japan, which was the up and coming, manufacturer of size, right? During World War II got exploded. And China got exploded from Japan taking over and just destroying that entire country. So we were all that was left. We were it. Right? So literally America at that point was 50% of the world's GDP. Everybody bought everything from us. That's why anywhere you go, you can, go see like their classic cars. They're all ours. Right? So with this idea and, understood, that reward that was given to the or to like the manufacturing people in this country, the baseline people, right? That understanding of like, hey, look, you don't have to be a Christian. You can just, be an American and be successful, right? You can just, as long as you follow the liberal democratic way, you are successful. You don't have to be a Christian. You can be a Muslim. You can be a Catholic. You can be whatever, right? You can be Italian. You could be, Irish. You could be black. You could be white. You could be Mexican. You could be Asian. It doesn't matter. You come here, you work hard, and you will be successful, right? And this was like the reward and the promise of liberalism. But the thing is that it was a moment in time where things were really, really good. And we do this a lot where like we go, oh man, America's the world hegemony, because like America is like so great and their form of government's amazing. It has nothing to do with this. It has everything to do with the fact that we were the only navy of scale left after World War II. We took everybody else. Like Japan literally was to the point where they didn't even have oil to run to run any boats that they did have left, right? We sunk everything. We destroyed the entirety of the rest of the world's militaries that had any type of real scale to them. That's why we're the world hegemony. That's why we're this fucking great, huge, giant country, right? With like all this power and all this money and all this prestige. It's left over from like our military campaigns. And that's it, dude. That's literally it. It has nothing to do with our form of government. We could have been like a straight communist dictatorship and we still would have been successful. It's that simple. No matter what you do, you can't mess that up. As long as you won, as long as like we were all that was it, that's all. Right? And it's attributed to this liberal religious ideology, right? And like even before they're like America was going to become because like we have the greatest piece of arable land in the world overlaid with the greatest river system on the world, right? We have coastal moats. We have every type of like we had oil, right? We had a population that was able to like grind hard and wasn't completely urbanized and stagnated. Right? Europe had, by the time America was founded, Europe had what? 5,000 years of civilization of them digging things out of the dirt and wiping out all the animals and the trees and the wildlife and all the stuff that ends up being able to feed the people who live there. Right? They didn't have any extra land. We had literally just massive amounts of room to just expand westward. And everybody could be successful. There was a reward for it. You work hard, man. You grind it out. You take a chance. You take a risk. You can be successful. You can have your own little plot of thing, right? And in having that land, guess what you have to do? You have to farm it. You got to work on it. You got to be part of it, right? That's a day-to-day thing. Why are Muslims so devout? Why is that? Why are they like much less likely to commit crimes in most other countries, right? I mean, other than like Europe, right? Like, why are they why are their countries have like such low crime rates and things of this nature and like such, cohesiveness? Because they all have, like, they have a religion where literally every day they have to pray 3 times a day and they have to wash themselves and they have all these things and fasting that they have to do, right? That's why that religion appeals to young men so much. It has structure. That's what having land does. It gives you structure. Day to day, you have stuff you have to do every day, right? You know how I started behaving? I got ducks and like stuff growing. I have to be here to feed them every day. I can't just be running around sleeping at broads' houses or sleeping at broads' houses. And doing all the extra stuff I used to do. What keeps men from becoming heroes? Family. It's a basic premise, man. Legitimately, right? You have to have like this is a very fundamental thing that I think we're just missing altogether. But let's keep rocking.
It's a really good question, and there's probably no one route to it. But I instantly I was reading this just before the stream, which if you can't see is just an overview by a chap called Jonathan Darcy of Berkeley's contentions with Locke, and he had many contentions with Locke because Locke was what we could call an empiricist realist, and Berkeley was an idealist. But Berkeley has a good point on one particular thing, in my opinion, which is the role of God in both conceptions of the world. And John Locke, just to be clear, was a deeply religious man. He thought atheism should be made illegal. He was that religious, right? So it isn't that John Locke wanted atheism. It's just, and I think this is a habit that many liberals have, they're very optimistic. Whereas you can get a slightly more cynical person like Berkeley. And he says expressly that if you create a worldview in which the universe is mechanical, so it's kind of like a clock, and it's wound up by God and then just left to mechanically operate on its own merits from that point onwards, then you don't actually need God to be a part of your worldview. And I think that is the genuine sort of beginning of bifurcation into atheism. Because if the universe is mechanical, all you need then is a doctrine that can replace God as the prime mover. And again, I just want to make it, I'm saying this as an atheist who has studied these things and come to these conclusions. I don't have an emotional need to drive to this point, because a lot of people will say, well, Christians would say that, or Muslims would say that, or whoever, but I'm neither a Muslim or a Christian, and I've never been, and I don't have any animus against either of the religions really at base. I'm just someone who has done the reading and has looked into it with what I hope is a fairly impartial perspective, and come to the conclusion, well, actually Berkeley is right on that, because of course we developed the doctrine of the Big Bang, and I'm not challenging any of the science or anything like that. I have no idea. I'm not a scientist. But what you can see philosophically is what happens is that easily replaces God, or actually it kind of kicks the ball further down the field, right?
So okay, let me break this down, right? So here's the premise, right? When we started colleges, right? And I mean, like, when you first, the idea of like universities as a tool to guide people, right? The people they were guiding were the aristocrats, right? And these aristocrats, these nobles as they were, right? The king's children, people in the king's court's children, right? What it was meant to do was to guide these people to be able to be better leaders and governors of other human beings, right? And what you did with that is you basically, you created a school for management, right? And what is a management school going to teach you to do? It's going to teach you to manage. So their belief, right? Their whole idea is going to be the idea that you can sit here and govern the affairs of human beings, right? As it were, right? And that's what they teach people to do. Like if you don't have that belief, if you don't have the ideology that you can stand here and govern, then you wouldn't do it. If you felt it was an impossible task, right? And so it was never on a level of where, like, oh man, God will take care of all these things, right? And we'll just live as Christians. That was never a thing. That was never, ever, ever a thing, right? Because if that was true, like, you would have had people living extremely devoutly, right? To the point where, like, if somebody didn't believe in God, they'd have killed them, right? Back in, the, 16s and 1700s, that just wasn't the case, especially not in Britain. Like, most of the founding fathers, like the most liberal, enlightened thinkers on the planet, like the end result of the Enlightenment were deists, right? They weren't Christians. So, in the end of the day, like, this premise it's a flawed premise as an in general thing, right? But let's keep rocking, man. Let's keep going.
Kicks the can, because of course, well, what's the origin of that? And we've got no answers. But for the modern rational person, the rationalist person, what that does is fully brings about Berkeley's prediction that, in fact, we will have a mechanical universe that does not require God, and therefore atheism will become predominant and religion will die. And how was he wrong? That's the answer.
Yeah, I find that really interesting because, of course, Carl Schmitt came to a similar conclusion when he talked about political theology. He said that kind of the deism that was popular during kind of these liberal periods was an attempt to remove God in many ways, for the removal of the miracle. And so he tied the transition from monarchy to liberal democracy to the same transition between the need for the miracle and the need for the mechanical universe. That the removal of the executive and their ability to will things into existence was also removal of kind of the power.
Well, it's not even that, right? In the end of the day, it's not. It's more, again, it gets back to, if you are a governor, right? If you're a manager, you want things in your hands, right? In the end, like, that's what you want. You want stuff to be like, you want it to be like something you can control, right? In the end of the day. So if you want control, then, like, you can't have that outside force constantly standing here going like, this is the rule and this is the rule and this is the rule, right? Because, like, it's just like the idea, like, we're not going to eat pig, right? Like, that's, if you live outside of the desert, that's dumb. We're not going to eat shellfish. Like, lobster is amazing, right? Like, legitimately, right? Like, these are the things that, like, you have to be able to change. And so, and in moving to new lands, right, where, like, you're not in Europe anymore, right? You're not in Britain, you're not in Spain, you're not in France, you're not in wherever, right? You're not in Germany, right? You standing here, moving to a new place, your new geography is going to dictate your culture more than your religion will. Because, like, if your religion doesn't match your geography that you have now, like, imagine being in Maine or Connecticut or whatever it is right up there, right? You're in, like, the Cape in Massachusetts. Like, your land isn't the best for growing things, and, like, there's a lot of winter, but you have a sea full of lobsters that are amazing. Your religion is not going to work. Like, you have to be able to stand here and, like, eat. And this is something that, as a man, as a governor, as somebody who runs a nation, right, as somebody who's a leader of the people in general, as a tribe, whatever, you're going to have to make that decision and go, hey, look, man, all right, that was old, this is new. And then it's just the beginning of a breakdown of things. This is why I say, like, your geography, your culture comes first, right? And this is the reason why we're having such a hard time today, is because we're all completely divorced from our geography and where we live and how we live. Like, I'm an Appalachian, so I'm much more tied to it than everybody else. And that's why I understand this, and y'all don't, right? I don't have to go to the grocery store. I got food growing out back, right? I walk down the street and there's apple trees. I just pick an apple and I eat it. like pawpaws in the woods. Like, there's all these things that, like, we have that y'all don't. Like, when you go outside and you smell the honeysuckles and you go over and you can pull one off, you nibble on the stem and shit. Like, these type of things that everybody else don't really have, right? Like it's Father's Day weekend. What did I do last night? I spent the day at the river. You know what I mean? Fishing. Right? These are premises that we're missing as a thing. But let's keep rocking, my friend.
Of God and his need for the divine intervention and the miraculous, the state of exception gets removed, and instead you're governed by mechanisms and constitutions rather than divine providence. And that kind of slowly but surely kind of shifts people into a mindset of, sure, maybe God's out there somewhere creating something, but he's not really necessary for our day-to-day function. We've rationally instituted a mechanism that will govern us objectively without the need for kind of the divine wisdom, imparted into a king or someone else. And therefore we are now able to kind of avoid this necessary miracle, this necessary connection to the divine.
And even that on its own, I don't think is the worst thing that could have happened. The presuppositions that were put in place by deeply religious and Christian people have carried on for generations, through which people became atheists. Like literally for the last 3 or 4 generations, you can see religiosity on the decline. And yet things still carried on, because at least the presuppositions of what it is to be a good and noble and decent person, and to have an orderly country, to follow the laws, all of these assumptions were all at least baked into the culture. But with the proliferation of this comprehensive liberalism that has gone through the educational system, through academia, from academia, and now into the educational system.
All right, so let's talk about this too, right? Because I did a stream recently with Atomic Shaman, right, where he invited me on because I'm the Appalachian in the area, right? Like, hey, look, what are the superstitions of Appalachia, right? What's the culture of Appalachia, right? And what are the reasons behind it? This is something that's important. There's reasons that people do things, right? Let me give you an example that you'll probably all know. Hindus don't eat cows. Why don't Indians and Hindus eat cows? Well, because they didn't have horses. A cow is a horse there. It's worth more for to, plow your field and pull your goods to market and give you milk and all these type of things, right? So therefore, you don't eat that cow because it's worth more to you than just the calories of its muscles. People do things for rational reasons. All of these superstitions that we have here, you don't split trees, you plant under a full moon, right? All these things that we do where I come from, right, have reasons behind them. Why do you plant under a full moon? Well, because during, when the moon's closest to the, when the moon's full, right, and and when the moon's full, you end up having water getting pulled closer to the surface of the ground. So therefore, you end up planting in, number one, softer earth, but also wetter earth, where the seeds will germinate better, right? Why don't you split trees? Because you don't want to put anything between you and whoever you're walking with, because it's very easy to end up. You don't go over something, or you don't step on something, you can go over or around, right? You don't go under things. The whole, you put a penny inside of your washer, right? Copper has always been seen as something that's, good luck, or it's a sacrifice for later, right? There's all these things that you do as part of that you call superstitions, but they're cultures, and they're probably positive, right? In the end of the day, right? Keeping your eyes open and paying attention to what you're doing at all times while you're moving around is never a negative move. Culture. Highly important things that we don't have any discussions about. Why? Because of the fact that when you have a culture, it stops you from participating in the liberal corporate mechanisms. This is an issue. We see our economy as being the number one thing that matters. Our fucking mean GDP number go up, bigot, right? But that is their God. That is their measure of how much they love their God, is how well the GDP is doing. Because the economy they see, how do I put this? Liberal accounting, right, is based off of how much luxury do you provide to the people and how productive are they. Well, the best way to measure that is through something called GDP, or GDP per capita, right? So how productive is each citizen in your country? And that's seen as being the most important thing that you can do. But it doesn't measure anything about your human experience. It has nothing to do with like liberalism or religion or culture or manifestations of how you are as a person or families or communities. It doesn't tie into any of that, right? Just like it doesn't measure how intelligent your population is, because the smartest of us do worse in the economy. Basic premise. That's the understanding, right? Because the midwits are who do the best, because the midwits are who do the best in the educational system. Why do you have all these trans kids all of a sudden? Because our education system for the past 30 years has been set up to maximize the number of females you can put through it. What are you going to spit out? A shit ton of effeminate fucking men. It's basic, buddy. Yo, it's basic. Real shit, right? Androgyny. Let's treat everybody as being equal. What happens? Everybody becomes the same thing. Human beings are not, you know what I mean? This is some basic ass premise about things. Let's keep rocking.
System as we see it, we are now seeing generations of people who are simply not tethered to those religious presuppositions, even though we haven't been religious for some time, right? And so that's where it becomes a real problem, because at least before you had a kind of unspoken anchoring in a reality of the universe. But now we've come to the point, well, actually the universe, if it doesn't conform to our moral choices, the choice of our free wills, then the universe itself is the thing that is wrong, not the will that is fighting against creation. And therefore I was born in the wrong body, therefore I was born in the wrong race, therefore you get all of these sorts of movements that are striving against the natural order. And that's quite a big challenge to take on. And it might actually be a lot easier if you come to peace with that which you are and change your mind rather than change your body. But I think it's all a bit late for that now, isn't it?
Do you think that healthy restrictions on the human can be removed from an investment in metaphysics?
Sorry, healthy restrictions on... Sorry, go on.
Yeah, do you think that people are able to self-regulate from individuation and liberation if they are not invested in an idea that the hierarchies around them naturally established are somehow based on something transcendent and metaphysical?
I think, yes, that is possible, because you could have a very practical and down-to-earth view of the world. Honestly, a rather English view of the world that isn't really very metaphysical, but is based in real-world practicality that is just a bit unthinking, but realistic, and would say, look, you're obviously a boy, you're obviously a girl, you need to do this, you need to do that, and you don't necessarily have to have a dogmatic transcendent view. However, there are other things that come along with that, because...
Okay, look. You want men, you want women, right? You want two different genders. You have to have jobs that require two different genders, right? Literally, like even warehouse jobs now, like women can do them. Why? Because they've added in machinery that allow women to do them, right? You don't have a society where you need men and women. Again, land, being tied to the land, farming, moving cows around, pigs, shoeing horses, all these type of things. You need men. We don't have a society where we need men. We don't have that, right? Most of the men are unseen, right? Like, you see a plumber when you call them. How often is that? Like, what, once every 15 years? Right? You see an HVAC guy when you call them. How often do you see them? Once every 20 years? Roofers, construction guys, all these type of things, right? Like, how often do you really interact with real men? Like, dudes who will punch you in the mouth. Rare. Only people you deal with who are still men, and we bitch about them all the time, are cops. And we all hate them to death. This is the problem, right? is literally like, yo, you don't have a society where you need men. You human beings require like the evolution of human beings required us to have like new things, right? You had to like stand here and grow big brains and be able to grow muscles and be able to walk. Why? We needed all these things, right? You had to have all these things to be able to survive because like we didn't have claws, we didn't have like massive teeth, right? We didn't have the ability to stand here, and jump really high or run really fast. We don't have all these type of things. We're not ambush predators, right? What are we? Right? We're top level, what? Primates. Right? We're able to throw projectiles, right? And outrun things. That's what we can do. We can outrun things better than anything the fuck else, right? Required us to have a brain so we can plan our routes, know what the future's going to hold, be able to stand here and like, eat enough and like plan enough that we can sit here and have enough food for everybody to be able to run. This is what we had to do. Right? So like literally we will evolve and adapt into being what we're going to be. If you have a society where you don't need men, like you're not going to create men. You have to have a place for your men to be in society, and we don't have that. Automation's coming. We have a choice to make as to what we're going to do. All get in the pods and eat the bugs? I don't like that idea. But we all farm. Start growing our own shit. That would actually have us have a necessity for men, a necessity for women, and a community. Sounds like a much better way to be. Let's have this conversation, man. Legit. Like a real shit. By the way, I'll link to my Discord's in my description. Anybody wants to come and holler at us about these type of things. We've been thinking about this shit, for a while now.
Then you do have, again, another valid argument against what essentially just collapses into utilitarianism, which is, well, why wouldn't you just live at the level of an animal then? And of course, you had the Epicureans through to Mill saying, well, surely the argument will go that the finer things in life are above animals to the intellectual pleasures, and so people will naturally strive towards them. To which we can look around at modern culture and say that's clearly not happened.
Right.
That was clearly wrong. People aren't striving for anything, and we're in a clear decline at this point. So that argument, I don't believe, holds up, even though conceivably it could have done. But no, I do find myself having difficulty refuting the point that actually having a higher ideal to strive for might actually be genuinely healthy for mankind.
Yeah, I would say beyond just healthy, like absolutely necessary for kind of one to order themselves and orient themselves kind of towards something like that. But
God, I hate suburbanite people. Like, I really do. I can't stand suburbanite people. Like, they're so just, Listen, all right? It's very basic. Human beings, what is the purpose of gaining wealth and riches? So you have the time to be able to do things. What is money, right? At the end of the day, it's time. That's what money is. It's time. Okay, like, money will buy you time. That is the only thing that money does, is it buys you time. And when you sell like your time for money, right? Like, which is what most of us do for work. You sell your time for money, right? Money is time. Time is money, right? It is what it is. Okay? That's why I say time is money. It's reality. Okay. What you're doing is you're allowing yourself to be able to have the time to fulfill your wants and desires. What are your wants and desires? Base level, food, shelter, these type of things, right? Sex. You maximize profits. You're going to maximize sex. You're going to maximize the things that you really just want to do, right? The things that hit your dopamine the hardest. Video games, gambling, drugs, food. Most people are cattle. What do cattle want? More grass, more water. Get fucked more. It is what it is, dude. Like, we're all just animals in the end of the day. You have to create artificial hardships for human beings, right? Like, religion doesn't do it. Religion doesn't matter unless, like, you need religion, right? Like, They say there's no atheist in a foxhole, and that's 100% true, right? There's no atheist in a foxhole. Like when you get down and dirty and get down like the bottom, right? And like I've met guys who were straight savage dudes, right? Who were doing real time for killing people right now, right? Like I know these guys who were like real savages. Every one of them were God fearing people, right? Like they hoped to God that God was there, right? Because like they had to. They didn't have a choice, right? When they went out, like they put their cross around their neck. Every real killer does this, right? Like you find religion when you're at the bottom of you're at your like most incapable of dealing with things. You want people to have religion, you have to have a purpose for having a religion. When you create too much good times, people stop having a religion. That's how you know religion isn't a baseline thing. It's people, like they don't stop eating. It's just reality is shit, man. Let's keep going. We're probably gonna do about like another 10 minutes.
Let's get back to comprehensive liberalism before we go too deep. Let's define our terms before we kind of go a little too deep here. You noted the difference here between classical and comprehensive liberalism. What is that practical difference, and can we really keep one from transitioning into the other?
Well, right. To answer the second question, no, I don't believe you can, actually. Unless you have a strong religious doctrine that underpins your liberalism, I don't believe. So the classical liberal position is, in the 20th century, most well represented in academia by Rawls. The Rawlsian political liberal says, well, liberalism is purely a political doctrine, and therefore, if the act that we're talking about, such as female genital mutilation or something, if that is illiberal, then we can make arguments to ban it. But the thing is, the same arguments therefore go further. And a comprehensive liberal would say, well, why do we stop at any one particular point? You may have an inherited narrow band of things that liberalism should consider. But why should liberalism therefore permit, say, a nunnery to exist, where you have a set of illiberal rules that a person consents to going into the nunnery, but then has illiberal practices imposed upon them? Or a person might willingly choose to have female genital mutilation in order to take part in a particular community that requires that for membership, in order to gain the other benefits of being in that community. And the political liberal would say, well, it's just because it's outside of the purview of the state. That person's made an informed choice to join the convent to get female genital mutilation, and therefore it's not my issue. But there's a definite moral hole there, because people will be looking at whatever illiberal practice they can see going on and say, well, look, I don't really agree with that. And in fact, it isn't so much that should be permitted to happen. In fact, I don't think that should be permitted to happen. But also, maybe we should start interrogating the formation of the beliefs that led to that being the choice that person would make. So the question of informed consent actually becomes, well, actually, illiberal institutions formed the desire for that person to go into that social institution, and therefore they didn't really consent to it. And so the comprehensive liberal starts challenging absolutely everything that they do in their life. And of course, there isn't any social institution in the world that can withstand non-stop, constant critiquing of everything you were asked to do, because at some point you're going to be asked to do something you don't want to do, and then the social institution breaks down. So yeah, I don't think actually without I'm just going to broadly call a conservative, a very firm conservative base, liberalism can prevent itself from bleeding into comprehensive liberalism, because when you have a strong conservative religious base, you have a suite of moral values that are important. These things matter all the time, and you are weighing up these values with the liberal values which conflict. Well,
all right, look. Let me break this down. If you do not have a need or a purpose for said values, they do not hold up. Simple. Right? Very basic. Because the moment those values conflict with something that other people actually want, like for instance, I'll give you a really good for instance, right? When you're standing here and you want to be able, libertarianism, very good idea about that. Yo, when you want to stand here and be able to do drugs, right? That means you have to let other people do drugs who can't handle doing drugs. Or you want to be able to drink and you want, like, other people want to be able to drink. And you can't really make, like, in conservatism, name me the reasons why you don't let, an 18-year-old soldier drink. Exactly. There's no reasoning behind it. And it doesn't make any fucking sense, which is why they do it, even though it's illegal. And even though conservatives support the law. Yeah, see, like, yo, conservatism doesn't hold up either, right? It all relies on rational, retarded nonsense. And you can ration away anything in the end of the day. Again, you have to have baseline institutionalism, right? You have to have that baseline of saying, hey, look, we're farmers, we're Appalachians, we're Massachusetts, we're Bostonians, whatever it is. You have to have something you belong to, right? Have to have something bigger than yourself. There has to be a baseline. There has to be a reason why you're doing all this shit. Because in the end of the day, if you're just an international citizen, there's nothing. And there never will be anything. In the end of the day. This is the problem, right? Is that, like, y'all don't understand. You have to actually have, you have to have a lever. You have to have a leverage behind these things. There has to be a purpose. Without a purpose, there's nothing. God's not a purpose. Simple. Yo, look, I'm Tom Pease with Pnoid News. If y'all enjoyed this, please like, share, and subscribe. Check out my other content on my channel. And you're going to like some of it. You're going to not like some of it. It is what it is. Yo, look, I'm going to holla at y'all later. Peace be like Walmart brothers. I'm out.